Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'm kind of recapping my Gameweek 6 team selection and explaining my thought process as we head into that lovely kind of Chelsea fixture swing in Gameweek 7, and probably a nice fixture swing for Man City as well in Gameweek 8 onwards. Just before the video starts, I'd like to shout out FPL Inez on Twitter, who was one of the first users to shout me out on the platform. She makes an FPL wish list every week, and last game week, everything she wished was wrong. So I think if you're following some FPL advice this week and you want some good ones, have a look at her wish list and kind of bet on everything else or everything opposite to what she kind of suggests. But going back to my team selection, so ultimately this week you'll notice that not much has really changed. The big kind of transfer is Sar, but I'll touch on him in a very short while. I think the biggest issue with this week is the fact that a lot of our players have an injury concern or maybe a rotation concern as well. Last week, for example, if you were a Reece James holder, you would have been quite worried about his kind of availability for future Chelsea games. And if you're a Christensen holder like me, you were probably quite worried, right before they headed into that Champions League match. But Christensen did play last week, so that's a nice positive in terms of my team and rotation. I also like the fact that, unfortunately, with Reece James playing in the EFL Cup, I think there's probably a larger likelihood that Christensen actually gets to play versus Man City. I can't see any other reason why he would have been rested for that game. Rudiger as well was someone who was rested. So I think those two players would probably definitely feature. That's just my personal opinion, but hopefully he does feature because he would actually really benefit my team selection. And I still kind of back the fact that I think Chelsea and Christensen, for example, can get a defensive result for City. We've seen them, perform actually exceptionally versus the big teams and the big sides, and particularly versus City. So hopefully, a repeat of something like the Champions League final can happen where Chelsea get a clean sheet. I think that's all I'm really asking for this week with Christensen. In terms of Trent, of course, there's a slight kind of illness concern. It's not a COVID concern, just to make it clear for you guys. Basically, what happened last week was that he was feeling a bit ill on the morning of the game, and Klopp sent him home. He wasn't confirmed to have COVID, so he can definitely feature this week. He didn't feature in the EFL Cup, which is, it's not a positive or a negative in my opinion. I think they just wanted him to get as much rest as possible, but I do think he actually can feature ultimately for that Brentford game, and I am kind of hoping that he 100% plays. I'm a little bit more unsure about Bamford, who I'll touch on, when I speak about the forwards, and kind of what adjustments my team will kind of have to make. But it probably just means that Cody comes on for my team, and I kind of play without Bamford for a week, because I would like to keep Bamford just for a while longer, just to see how the fixtures are. And if I can keep him to game week 9 or 10, I can probably swing back into someone cheaper like Tony and maybe finance a different kind of formation when I kind of move deeper into defense, as I've discussed in many previous videos. In terms of my actual team selection for this week, though, in terms of the defense, the big kind of decision at the back was actually, choosing between Livramento and Cody. And I think what's promising as a Livramento owner is just how solid Southampton have been at the back in the last two games. I think they've really shut out both their opponents in terms of XG. Now, Southampton haven't created many chances themselves, and that's a little bit dismaying, but ultimately I have a Southampton defender, and that's all I can really be happy with, right? If they can keep a clean sheet versus Wolves, that's perfect. But I also think when you actually look at the balance of probabilities and whether Livramento can actually create an assist, for example, there is that possibility there, whereas there isn't probably as much of a significant one for Cody. And I think just on the balance, it might be a game where both sides concede. Potentially, it could be another 0-0 that Southampton actually hold another team for. But I just like the fact that maybe Livermento's expected points is just a bit higher, and I want to kind of play with that risk and have Cody on the bench, who's a solid bench option for me for this kind of game week. Moving on to the midfield, you'll of course notice the fact that I actually have moved away from Greenwood and I've gone into Sar. I'll kind of explain both options in the sense that, why I'm not so high on Greenwood and why I'm high on Sar. In terms of Greenwood, I think the slight issue is just the fact that I think he doesn't really suit that kind of right mid position in terms of an FPL asset, right? Ultimately, when you actually saw kind of his underlying stats when he was performing exceptionally well, kind of scoring goals almost on a weekly basis, you have to say that the kind of statistical opportunities weren't really there. Greenwood is almost like a baby son where he's a very clinical finisher, and when he actually has opportunities in the box, he's extremely lethal. Now I think the issue with Ronaldo is that Ronaldo's kind of making these chances for himself, making these runs. He's also occupying the spaces that Greenwood would usually like to occupy. And simply put, he's just a much more efficacious version of Greenwood, and there's no reason to really for OGS to kind of play Greenwood as a centre forward now. And when he's kind of put on the right mid position, you can see he doesn't really have much impact on the game, and I think that was proven true in that West Ham game where he was subbed out very early. I think someone like Lingard, for example, plays a little bit better from these kind of wing positions where he's a bit used to maybe carrying the ball just a bit further, and at times also playing off the ball a little bit more. With Greenwood kind of separated so much from the box, I think he's just not the best kind of chance creator. It's not like he's crossing balls into Ronaldo too much. It's not like he's getting those kind of touches and shots in the box, and you can see those kind of stats and numbers kind of slowly dissipating. So I think whilst there's also another kind of big contention with Jota, who I'll touch on in a second, I just don't like Greenwood, and I would like to kind of move on from him as soon as possible. In terms of Sarr, I think there's a lot of things to be actually enjoyed. I think the thing about Sarr is that, yes, he's a little bit pricier than some of the enablers, such as Gray and Gallagher, but I think it's the fact that these 2 game weeks in it, like ahead, I think they have to be capitalized on. I think when you look at Newcastle last game and look at the opportunities and the space they provided that leads to kind of attack, all the balls were actually going to Rafinha on the right hand side, where Rafinha was kind of holding this kind of wide right position, waiting for a diagonal ball. Now, I'm not saying Watford have the opportunity to always kind of service the ball to Sarr, but I think the amount of gaps that were actually provided when let's say Richie was playing at left back were very evident, and I think Sarr can definitely capitalize on this as a talisman for Watford, and I just really like the subsequent fixture versus Leeds, especially given the fact that Leeds' defense is so thin right now, and I just think those fixtures will kind of definitely pay for itself, and it's not me just kind of chasing points. I think there's very good logic to get Sarr for these 2 fixtures, and I think it's undeniable that Newcastle and Leeds are probably 2 out of 3 of the worst defenses in the league, alongside Norwich, and that's pretty much how I see things. Watford have the ability to blitz teams, and I think when you look at, for example, the way Leeds play, sometimes they give those opportunities away as well. So I think those 2 game weeks are critical, and I'm not saying Sarr's going to repeat a hat-trick performance versus Liverpool, but ultimately you can keep him, I think, for quite a long time before you maybe move into some other enablers if you really think he's not an interesting asset. But I just think there's an opportunity here to kind of move away from Greenwood, and I'll take it at this point in time, especially in a game week where it doesn't really make sense to move into the Chelsea defense just yet. And with Jota, obviously, I still kind of think that when we go back to Jota and you actually look at his fixtures, I think there is an opportunity to actually keep Jota in the side. Yes, he obviously has that tough Man City game, but ultimately all teams will have a tough game, here and there. And I think it's totally understandable to actually keep Jota and maybe even have him stay in the team until he kind of faces Watford, and maybe kind of make a decision after that. Because, yes, whilst he probably has to rotate with Firmino just a little bit, they have to kind of play Champions League football. There could be a bit more of a priority there for Liverpool. There's also kind of the element that, for example, Firmino is coming back from injury. So when we look at the Brentford game coming up ahead, I still expect Jota fully to start. Yes, Brentford are a good defense, and we can talk about that. And I think, as I mentioned, Brentford are very interesting with the game week swing, around 9 to 10, and that kind of range is interesting. But I still think when you're kind of put against what would be, at least on terms of underlying stats, the kind of statistically best side in the league for attack, I think Jota has the opportunity still versus Brentford, and I would like to kind of capitalize on that. Whereas I think with Greenwood, even if the fixture might be slightly nicer, or the fixtures in general for the next few game weeks, I just think that the position he's playing in right now is very limited. It benefits some of the other players in the system. Even Bruno probably gets more chances just because of the fact that he's actually creating these balls, and you can see these kind of opportunities being kind of capitalized on Ronaldo. I'm not going to kind of wait for another kind of lucky shot kind of to be an FPL assist for Greenwood to kind of keep him in my team. I just think it makes more sense, at least tactically for me, to kind of move away from him, because I just don't really like the position he's playing in right now, and I can't see Ronaldo being dropped anytime soon with the form he's in. In terms of the rest of my team, of course, I did touch on the fact that I'm keeping Benrahma. I think I'm practicing patience, and I think the reason why I'm keeping Benrahma is because he still is at a fantastic price for me. I got him very, very early on, and I still think whilst West Ham don't have absolutely fantastic fixtures, their attack is still very prevalent in my opinion. I think that was proven versus United, where they actually popped in a few chances even before that kind of Benrahma fluky goal, to be honest. And what I like about Benrahma this week is he gives me the chance to kind of play with Antonio and provide a consistent differential, as a lot of people probably don't have Antonio as much as expected, given the fact that he got a red card, and a lot of people probably transferred them out of their wildcard teams. And if ultimately a player is kind of taking Antonio back in this week, they would have probably suffered in terms of budget. So I still see it as a pretty much like a medium long term win, having Benrahma and Antonio, and kind of keeping their prices. Bamford, of course, is an injury concern, but as I mentioned, I think Cody will probably come in. I'm hoping, obviously, that Christensen plays. Otherwise, Williams will have to kind of see the field. But I'll probably stay in touch with the press conferences, and if there is a worry that maybe two of my players won't play, then I'll probably have to maybe make a different kind of transfer to Sar. I'll communicate that probably on Twitter. But I really think that most of the players here will play. It seems like Bamford is likely fit enough to play. He obviously was kind of saved for the EFL Cup game, just like Trent. And I think it kind of leaves us just to talk about captaincy very briefly, right? My captaincy is going to go to Ronaldo. I think there are fantastic options in terms of Salah and Antonio, to be quite honest. I think Antonio actually makes a little bit more sense than Salah. I think, first of all, Antonio provides a huge kind of differential hole. But I think I'm personally covered by having Benrahma, hopefully. What Antonio also provides is the fact that he gets to play versus this Leeds defense, which are very, very shambolic. And what we've seen so far, at least this season, is that Antonio has been able to hold versus poor defenses, and this is the perfect opportunity, right? With Ayling potentially being out, you pretty much have an opportunity for Antonio to kind of haul, maybe with a kind of 1 goal, 1 assist tally, or even a brace. And I don't think that's out of order. And I think, once again, kind of similar to that kind of Crystal Palace fixture, where, to be honest, I think Palace have actually ended up being, or slightly higher in my expectations after that game than before. But I do think Leeds have been a terrible defense, for the season. That's exactly why I have Sar as well, for example, to kind of have a look at the Leeds defense in the subsequent week. So I think Antonio is a fantastic opportunity, but you can't pass up on the fact that Ronaldo's kind of stats are truly up there. The fact that they're playing at home versus what would be probably one of the actually better defenses in the Prem, especially in the top half, in my opinion, outside of that kind of Manchester City, Chelsea and Liverpool kind of trident of defense. I really think up with Brentford and some other teams. Aston Villa have actually looked very good after the Watford game. I think the Watford game was what you could consider to be a blip, and since then I think Aston Villa have actually performed exceedingly well. Yes, they've been blitzed by Chelsea, but when you look at those kind of Chelsea goals, once again I have to say those were kind of world class goals, and you don't expect those kind of goals every week. So I think that is pretty much how I see things with the team selection. I would like to go with Bamford. I'd hold him even if he was injured for this game week. I'd hopefully have Cody coming in and hopefully have Trent playing instead, and hopefully Christensen plays. And that's pretty much how I see things for this game week. Let me know what you guys think about the team and what your kind of plans are going forward as we kind of approach the fixture swing. And I hope you guys have a lovely game week.